it's kind of interesting to think about how degraded society has become and how quickly that has happened. Now, realistically, if they tried to pull something like this off by getting these gang-stalking operations going in the 1950s in Canada or the United States, it wouldn't work. I don't think it would have worked because at that time, people had a firm sense of morality, a realistic understanding of right and wrong, quote unquote good and evil, right? So in order to change that, to bring us to the point where we are today, so that they can conduct these operations with people who are willing to go along with them, there has to have been something that happened to significantly change people's perception of morality, right? And certainly they've done this by utilizing control of the culture, control of TV, obviously, Hollywood, all pop culture, basically, and sort of using that to slowly degrade our perception of what is right and wrong. And one of the important factors in doing this was having, back at the time, let's say when Nietzsche published Beyond Good and Evil, right? That was, obviously, if you look at that book, that is something that was written to try and kind of challenge the perception of morality at the time. And of course, if you look into it, Nietzsche was a Freemason, of course, so surprise, surprise. But they had to do that, right? They had to kind of gradually sort of change our perception of what is right and wrong. Like, should you follow someone around who's done nothing wrong? So now we've come to this point where our perception of morality, good and evil, is so fractured, is so distorted, that it is much easier now to get people to do things that most would consider immoral or wrong, right? It's kind of like organized harassment. But to bring us to that point, there had to have been a significant amount of influence on people's minds, which changed their perception, right? Changed their perception of good and evil. And yeah, like they've done that with obviously everything that surrounds us in the culture, the music, films. They just completely degraded and debased everything. So that even literature, it's now what passes for literature. You got Stephen King, and they promote him, and there's one of these biker guys there, anyway, who follow targets around all the time. They're part of the operation. They have these silly criminal bikers who show up at your exact location regularly. But yeah, so yeah, you have things like these writers who they promote, who are terrible writers, right? They get given they don't even have their own ideas. Most of them are given a concept, probably, and again, the CIA controls a lot of that as well, right? Because they do want these themes brought to the public consciousness. So, like a lot of the things in Stephen King's writing, I used to read his books when I was in my 20s, and a lot of his books have very, very heavy themes of predictive programming within them, right? The Stand is obvious. The virus, where they have the military coming in and removing people from their homes and putting them in detainment camps. So yeah, like things like that. They use people like that to debase the culture, and it took a long time, right? It wasn't done overnight. Rome wasn't built overnight, as they say, but they brought us to this point by chipping away gradually at our perception of what right and wrong is. And now it's like, things that would normally be considered wrong, immoral, evil, people just go along with it. And it's very, it's difficult to see that and not understand that something significant has happened to bring us to this point, right? And again, That's why they funded people like Nietzsche to write books like Beyond Good and Evil. They had to chip away gradually at our sense of morality. And again, Nietzsche's purpose as well is to completely try and turn people away from Christianity, turn people away from the foundation of morality, which had previously, held sway in Western countries. And Nietzsche, of course, was heavily promoted because of, Freemasonry. They're only going to promote people from their little secret society. So he was one, and another one was Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a Freemason, if you look into it, too. Of course, the theory of evolution. And funding these people to change our perception of what is right and wrong, and to turn people away from Christianity, essentially. And that didn't happen overnight. Again, it took some time, but now they brought us to this point where it's just unbelievably debased. The culture is just totally degraded, and it's very disturbing. So returning to what I was speaking about previously, in order to get us to the point where we've come to today, where people will basically do anything for money, where morality has been basically flushed down the toilet and replaced with a love of oneself, and a love of materialism. It took quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of time, but the people who have done this had a very extensive plan, and in fact that plan involved utilizing multiple generations of people to do this, right? To bring us to where we're at today. But again, they started doing these things gradually way back when, like even when people like Nietzsche published his book Beyond Good and Evil. And that is all about trying to change people's perception of morality, trying to distort our perception of morality and our God-given conscience, and trying to obscure and push that aside, and instead of conscience, to kind of promote do what thou wilt, like the Aleister Crowley sort of ideology, right? Of do what feels good, and don't be restricted by any silly boundaries, of course. And the thing is, these boundaries, these rules were put there for the betterment of humanity, right? And they were put there for man's benefit. But yet, gradually over time, they've been able to warp our sense of morality to the point where it's at today, where it's just virtually non-existent. And like as I said as well, if they tried to implement things like this, like the gang stalking things and these other such nefarious agendas in places like Canada or the United States in the 1950s, it probably wouldn't have worked, and it would have been, in fact, it wouldn't have worked, because people at that time had a firm sense of morality, firm sense of good and evil. And for those people who make these ridiculous arguments about that morality is subjective, it's just nonsense. It's just they do that to try and justify evil acts, right? Morality isn't subjective. Like, murder is wrong 100%. Murder is evil. Rape is evil 100%. Rape is 100% wrong. There's no confusion about that. There shouldn't be anyway, right? But what these people, these influencers of public opinion, gradually have been able to do over the years is change the perception. There's a police car there going by. But anyway, not surprising. Change the perception of huge amounts of the population, right? And film has played a major part in that. All of the music and the pop culture. I mean, you can see how debased all of that is now. I mean, it's just terrible, and it's not even like, it's just awful. And the most vile things are promoted. Hedonism is always promoted, love of self, materialism, valuing money above all else. So yeah, to be able to get us to this point took them some time, but it's you can see what's been done here, and and of course they use all these celebrity influencers, right? Like musicians, all these people, to just promote these things, promote hedonism, debauchery, narcissism, and just all these things that debase the culture. And again, just look at the culture of the 1950s compared to now, where at that time, having a family was promoted. Conducting yourself with dignity was the norm, right? I mean, there were obviously some people who didn't at that time, but much more rare than now. Promiscuity wasn't promoted the way it is now. All these harmful things were frowned upon, and even in there's one of the bikers there. Even in film, even some of the things that Hollywood put out at that time still promoted good things, morals, right? And over time, they just gradually chipped away at that, though. They gradually changed the public perception. And it's brought us to where we are today. And where we are today is very disturbing.